Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, a tale of missed opportunities at the Brazilian Grand Prix here on Friday, with both Mercedes and certainly McLaren believing they had enough today for pole position, but thanks to a massive raid storm cloud that arrived and the surprise resurgence of Aston Martin and Lance Stroll, that was denied. Verstappen takes pole. Is there going to be anything different come Sunday, especially given the rest of the weekend is expected to be dry? Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. We'll get into where this came from here in just a second, because we've got to discuss practice, but also the Sao Paulo Grand Prix will remain on the calendar until at least 2030 with a 5-year extension. This is always a W. I believe today's qualifying session Q1, the gap between P1 and P16 was something like 0.487 seconds, which is the closest, if not one of the very closest gaps we have had since 2006, really, when this format came into being. So Sao Paulo is great for qualifying for racing. Interlagos is one of the best circuits. I still think it should be the season closer. Unfortunately, that's not how it is anymore, but great tracks like this always good to see when they get extended. So, and that's until at least 2030, hopefully for a lot longer than that. One of the big talking points leading up to this weekend, though, was all these rumours around Alonso and Perez and what's going on there. I'm pretty sure even Crofty mentioned on the broadcast today that it's possible those rumours about Perez had some base in reality. We'll see. And I thought that the race did an interesting video where they brought up quotes of what Christian Horner said about Pierre Gasly and about Alex Albon just before they kicked them out of the team, and on both occasions he said, our intention is to keep Gasly, our intention is to keep Albon, but and just the other day he said our intention is to keep Perez. So read into that what you like. But Albert Fabrega did the tweet the other day that implied something big was happening behind the scenes. We now think that might be unrelated to drivers. We don't really expect Alonso to Red Bull to be a reality, but he did comment on this after Alonso threatened consequences for those spreading this rumour, basically. And Albert says, I want to apologise for my tweets about the rumour I heard in the paddock. It was a mistake and I apologise to anyone I may have caused offence to. So I don't know if, someone turned up at Albert's door in a black suit and a little, I don't know, Spanish flag insignia or something, because, Albert was definitely thinking, all right, I better make this tweet before Alonso brings the consequences that he's going to try and bring. Now let's talk practice. This was one of the big moments, and I was surprised by what happened here, to be honest. This is Nico Hülkenberg on the outside of the corner. This is Lando Norris. Now, Norris clearly wasn't noticed by Hülkenberg. He comes barreling into the final corner, basically the final corner right before you go onto the straight, going down into the finish line, and Norris has to weave outside, and Hülkenberg doesn't know he's there. Okay, mistake on Hülkenberg's part, it's practice, these things happen. But then Norris doesn't turn into the corner. He actually just stays pointing his car in a straight line, and, well, you can see it better from this angle, actually. You can see there's no intention here for Norris to take this corner, and it seems like he was, a bit of revenge, really, right? He's basically saying to Hülkenberg, look, you should have noticed me, now I'm going to force you away from the track, just to show you that that was a mistake. But actually, Hülkenberg turns in anyway. He turns into the back of Norris. I'm guessing he must have got some damage there on the front wing. And, Norris could honestly have got a puncture from this. Didn't happen, though. Reminded many of this incident from Austria 2016, when this is turn 3 Austria, when Rosberg simply decided not to turn into the corner and force Hamilton off the track. It was actually Rosberg that got the most damage from this, and he went on to lose the race, which Hamilton won. But, pretty legendary moment, and not too dissimilar to what Norris did. This eventually went to the stewards, and as I expected, it was just, all right, no further action, guys. Mistakes on either part, whatever, we go again. Now, the other big talking point of practice were the punctures that were going on, because I think there was the Porsche Cup maybe in Interlagos very recently, and that left all sorts of stones and screws and just stuff strewn across the track. They clearly hadn't done a good enough job picking up on this, because initially Alonso's hard tyres very early on had a puncture on the rear left tyre, and later in the session Hamilton got a rear left puncture as well, which cannot be a coincidence. And as Fernando said, we've got a puncture, the circuit is in such a bad shape, full of stones, not Formula 1 standard right now, and then Hamilton as well got a puncture rear left. So he had to call it a day, and that's not great on this type of weekends when there are not many tyres. The tyre allocation is relatively limited on these sprint weekends. You need all the mediums and hards you can get, especially for the races, the sprint and the Grand Prix, those will be the tyres that are really utilised. There has been some talk as well as to whether they will get a set of tyres reinstated, because it's not the team's fault that those tyres had issues, it was the fault of the circuit on the day, and therefore you could argue that, well, the teams will certainly be arguing they should be given those tyre allocations back, because, you know, a lost set of mediums for Hamilton, a lost set of hards for Alonso is probably going to be a pretty big deal come the rest of the weekend. But anyway, if there was any practice session which basically meant nothing, it was this one. The teams were running all sorts of stuff. The Red Bulls literally just used one set of hards and that was it. Did no soft tyre running, no medium tyre running at all. Russell's fastest lap here was on the mediums, most others here on the softs, and there wasn't really much to say. It was so unrepresentative, but these were the fastest laps out of interest, just to compare these numbers to what people were eventually doing come qualifying. And also, the two McLarens were last and second last, Norris and Piastri down there P19, P20, but Piastri actually was roughly 2.5 tenths up on Sainz's time, but decided to box before the end of his fastest lap attempt. So that showed that McLaren did have some pace going into today. And also the long runs, just to quickly mention, you can't read into this much, but Russell's long runs were faster than Verstappen's, but the likelihood is that they were on different fuel loads. It's quite possible that Russell's fuel load here was sprint fuel load, whereas Verstappen's might have been full race fuel load, because I think Verstappen was in the 17s, whereas Russell here was in the 16s. Do wonder as well though, because I know Russell did mention that the plank wear issue that Mercedes had back in Austin, and so did Leclerc, right, could re-emerge here. So I'd have thought that if Mercedes were going to practice before they have to choose their setup for the weekends, they might have tried a full fuel run just to see, because that's when the majority, if not all of that wear would have come on the floor at Austin, was in the first 15 laps where the car's at its heaviest. So I thought Mercedes might have tried that. So maybe this was on high fuel and actually that was very competitive, but I guess only time will tell on this one. So lots of talk about trying to get those tyres reinstated there by the screws and nails that were causing issues. And yeah, they informed the FIA, and the FIA said, all right, let's delay qualifying by 15 minutes so we can clean up this debris. And it's kind of crazy looking back on this, right? Because if qualifying wasn't delayed and it was 15 minutes earlier, we probably would have had a much better finish to qualifying. Rain is good in qualifying when it's drying up. When rain happens suddenly, as in fairness it kind of did last year as well, that's when you start to get some issues emerging with how entertaining these sessions could have been. But Q1 was interesting. I mean, here we go. Norris immediately P1 by quite some margin. This was actually faster than the pole time, right? To 10.6 here. It was faster than Verstappen eventually set pole with. All over the place though. The Hasses were good. The Hass is such a funny car, right? The fact that it's actually quite good in quali trim and just falls apart in the race is still so sad. Perez at this point was down in P17, and honestly, there was risk here that in Q1 it was going to rain. I mean, it eventually arrived, but the risk of rain for the session was given as 60%, and there was some talk that there were drops coming down, and if it had have slammed it down at the end of Q1, then Perez would have been out of qualifying, right? I mean, he was here in P17 after a pretty rough first go of things. He eventually makes it through in P13. But again, we've got to talk about the absolute clown fiesta that's going on in the pit lane right now. The last couple of weeks, since really Singapore time, the drivers have simply been stopping at the end of the pit lane. The reason why they do this is because in order to ensure that there's no traffic on the track. The idea is they want the traffic to be cleared up before the laps begin. So what they've done over the last few races said, all right, drivers, once you get past the second safety car line, you have a maximum lap time you must adhere to by the time you get to the finish. If you don't, you'll be under investigation, and unless there's a good excuse, you'll get a penalty. Now, no one's actually got a penalty for that yet. What it means is the drivers, though, do their waiting before they get to the second safety car line, which is pretty much at the exit of the pits, really. It's shortly afterwards on most tracks. So in previous races, the drivers were just stopping at the end of the pit lane because it was kind of not allowed, but it was kind of what they wanted to do. So Verstappen or Russell or whoever would just stop at the end of the pits. It looked like a complete shambles, really. And this weekend, the FIA said, all right, guys, you can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to stop at the end of the pits. That's now going to be a proper infringement and there will be penalties. So instead of that, the drivers will now go along the pit lane, but they will just dawdle along at 2 miles an hour. And because Brazil is a very long, and actually it's quite a blind pit lane, because it's a really long one, and you do this left-hander here where Gasly is coming out of the pits. I do also wonder what's going to happen if this remains at Abu Dhabi, because, you know, that pit lane goes under the track and is a completely blind tunnel. So if you were to barrel around and there was a guy dawdling in front of you, that is contact. And they were lucky not to have contact here. Russell was slow. Gasly has to go over to the grass here to get past Russell, and it was a complete mess. And there was more of it in a second that we'll see. This is how things ended Q1. Verstappen eventually was P2. Russell went fastest with a 1:10.3. Hülkenberg was P4. It was all over the place, to be honest. Perez eventually stuck through, but both AlphaTauris out, which is surprising because there's been lots of talk about Ricciardo and the setup changes and moving in the right direction. After Ricciardo's great weekend last time out, they were both out. So both Alpha tractors, both sets of Alpha tractors, out in Q1. Ricciardo only 6,000ths off Tsunoda, but it wouldn't have been good enough anyway to get through because Gasly and Ocon snuck through P14, P15 respectively on a weekend where Piastri can try and take a step towards beating Alpine on his own. He's only 17 points behind right now, Piastri, from beating Alpine as a team, which would be quite sweet, I imagine, for Piastri. This was another case of it here, where Verstappen comes barreling around and he decides, right, I don't care Checo, I don't care Ocon, I'm just going to come speeding past on the grass. So, a complete mess. And to be honest, stopping at the end of the pit lane looked terrible, but this is now just straight up dangerous, really. You've got drivers flying past other ones in the pits because they're trying to go slow. It's a complete shambles. And yeah, so there's some drivers investigators. I'm pretty sure Perez, both Alpines and Russell are under investigation for this. So we'll see what happens on that one. And yeah, as Charles said, what is Russell doing? He's going way too slow. That's ridiculous. He took like a 20-second gap because, you know, he would have liked to do this stopping at the end of the pit lane. That's no longer allowed. So instead he goes 2 miles an hour along the pit lane, which apparently is perfectly fine, as long as you stay to the left-hand side. But they weren't really staying to the left-hand side, and therefore if anyone behind wanted to pass, they had to do so effectively off-track and on the grass. Bit of a problem. I don't know what the FIA are going to do about it. Bit of a mess, to be honest. And this is Alex Albon. I got a feel for Albon, really, because 2 weeks in a row now, he's been pushing to the absolute limits to try and get this to Williams on a circuit that shouldn't be really any good for it out of Q2. And he might well have done, but this was just about outside of track limits. Maybe very marginal again. But yeah, Albon, lap time deleted. It doesn't get through. And in the end, Hülkenberg, both Alpines and Magnussen and Albon out in Q2, as you might expect. So, to be honest, again, back to some usual suspects. And Aston Martin, having a couple of terrible weekends, now back on form. They have brought a lot of changes this weekend. They're back on Stroll's car to like an older spec version of the car, which seemingly is working better than Alonso's right now. So it's interesting to see what they've done. But clearly something has worked, because they went from being nowhere to all of a sudden actually having some decent pace. But it's both Bulls, both Mercedes, both Ferraris, both McLarens, and both Aston Martins. It feels like we're back where we were a few weekends ago at this point, and this was what the sky looked like going into Q3. And it's kind of, as I say, I'd have much preferred if it was raining, now, you know, steady rain at the start of qualifying, and then it was slowly drying up. Those are the best conditions, because lap times keep on improving. There's, we're going to go to slicks, are we not? Inters or slicks faster? That's the fun part. The not fun part is when you know it's going to rain, and the first guy on track gets pole, which is effectively what happened here today. But it was really interesting conditions, because at the end of Q2, Leclerc, Hamilton, they went out on brand new set of softs, I think, to try and ensure they got through, and they barely improved on their used tyre runs. It was quite clear that the track conditions were cooling down substantially, the wind was picking up, and already at the end of Q2, the track conditions were slower than they had been 5 minutes prior. So Q3, the track conditions were probably going to be worse again, colder track, less grip on the tyres, the wind was picking up, as I say, as well, and there's rain coming down in 7 minutes. Now, the 7-minute estimate was an important one for the teams, but it turned out it arrived rather sooner than that. So as you can see on the right hand side here, just as Verstappen crosses the line, the rain was expected in 2 minutes. But look at the sky. I mean, it's unbelievable to think that this is mid-afternoon in Interlagos, right, and not the dead of night, because that is spectacular, as much as it is pretty terrible for the guys that went out slightly later. Hamilton and Russell weren't too far behind. The Astons were up there as well. Leclerc was a little bit further back, actually, and did a pretty impressive lap. But you can see the difference between when Verstappen finished his lap first, I also don't really know why Verstappen was first and Perez was literally last. Like, if Red Bull really wanted to make a point of like, all right, guys, we think the rain might be here earlier, let's get cracking, you know, they sabotaged Perez if they thought that. So I'm guessing they didn't, and I'm guessing they thought that Perez would have been fine, but still, Verstappen knew what he was doing. He got out there first, got his lap in. It wasn't an especially clean lap, really, but he at least put it together. And, okay, he had a couple of moments, but it was a good enough lap, and that was good enough for pole position in the end, because Leclerc can only go second. I think the last 3 Grand Prix, Leclerc's been P1, P1, P2, so that's not a bad run of form. But the McLarens, I mean, Norris was looking like the fastest man on track for both Q1, Q2, really. Okay, difficult to say, so many other things going on, but he had the pace for pole, no doubt about it. But McLaren sent the boys out quite late. Norris's lap was one of the last ones to be completed. The Astons got in there first, and while it wasn't raining, it was super strange, really, because, you know, Leclerc was saying on the radio that it wasn't actually raining, but it just felt like it was raining. I'm guessing the temperatures just plummeted and the grip just started to drop away. Felt super slippery. The winds picked up in the final corner. Piastri goes off at the final corner, causes a yellow flag. That causes Perez to have to back off, and that's only good enough for P9 from him. So these are the overall numbers. So Verstappen P1, Leclerc P2, then a significant drop back to the Astons. But it's Stroll ahead of Alonso, right? I mean, where has this pace come from the Aston Martins? And as I say, Alonso probably has some pace on Stroll, but seemingly the car setup they've gone for with Stroll is better than Alonso's, and I'm sure Perez is also asking, like, all right, if they can use 2 different floors, why can't I? Because that's apparently what Perez requested a few races ago, was to bring back an older floor version that he was more comfortable with. But definitely missed opportunities here, because that, you know, that Red Bull, it seems like in their practice testing in FP1, they were just straight up setting up for race trim. You know, they did do no running on softs or mediums. They just did hard tyre running. They seem to be maximizing the potential of that car in the race. And it was gettable in qualifying. It was quite clear from Q1, Q2, Verstappen could have been out qualified today, but he got it right. The other teams got it wrong. Both Mercedes were behind him, couldn't get a clean lap in. Certainly the McLarens, I mean, yeah, going out so late scuppered their chances. But still, for Hamilton, he would have been P3 today, which would have been a winnable position for the Grand Prix, if not for the Aston Martin. So that's where he'll be frustrated, is that he all of a sudden finds himself in a P5 position where winning is going to be a massively tall order, especially because you've got to pass Alonso, and that's never going to be easy to do. So look, Stroll gets a lot of criticism, but you've got to praise him when he gets it right, because again, tricky conditions today. Stroll can be known to deliver some good performances in the wet, tricky conditions. Okay, he has a stinker in him as well. He's Lance Stroll, but today he delivered the goods. Out qualifying Aston Martin, a front 3-row start, second row start is very impressive. Will they be able to hold on in race trim? I doubt it, but I guess we'll go on to see. I'll just share here what Norris has to say, because he reckons that, yeah, the pace was there for pole today.
That was great, honestly. The car was amazing. Yeah, easily probably quick enough to be quickest today, and on pole. So pretty gutted. That's to end the way we did. Yeah, I don't know what to feel about it. I think the car was amazing. It came alive a lot in qualifying, and easily good enough to be quickest, let's say. Obviously, delivering the lap and putting it together in Q3 and everything's a different job, but easily quick enough. So yeah. Disappointed, another disappointing Saturday.
Hamilton also said the car, the Mercedes, was showing signs of decent performance, but generally a couple of tenths away from the top guys. I think the conditions at the end maybe had us a little bit further back than that, so difficult to say. Russell as well was kind of frustrated because, well, as Hamilton goes on to say, it's fifth. Fifth's never that great. Did the best I could. Hopefully we'll have a better race, and yeah, Russell was also kind of mind-blown with how quickly the conditions turned there in qualifying. So I guess we'll see tomorrow, which is, you know, the pro and the con of sprint races. Okay, sure, we have a race tomorrow to look forward to. Okay, to sprint it into Lagos, it should be a good time. But at the end of the day, we will see. How's it going to go in qualifying tomorrow? The sprint shootout. Is Verstappen going to drive off into the distance? And if he does, then we pretty much know what's going to be happening on Sunday. Just to quickly note, Perez, I don't believe, is under investigation. It's more so that he was impeded by others, and therefore they want his perspective. So we'll see how that trends over time. Very much interested in your thoughts and all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.